Welcome to the acclaimed podcast, The Deep Dive, featuring your esteemed hosts, Andy Monitor and Drew Dinzik, powered by BetSperts.
Welcome to The Deep Dive. Andy, people have spoken. They said they want more deep dive episodes, and so we're giving it to them. 4 hours a week, not enough. In seriousness, we've been enjoying so far the foray back into NFL previews, hitting the team by team stuff. Has been awesome to get back involved, but that has, at least last season, it kind of predicated our ability to talk to some of the smarter folks in the space about their process, about what they are picking up as they prepare for the season. And if you are not kind of broadening your opinion by collecting as much information as possible from everyone you know who's smarter than you, then you're doing yourself a disservice, especially in a market that is as competitive as the NFL. So we're going to add these Friday conversations with some of the other folks in the handicapping space who focus on NFL, who have bright ideas about the shape, the way the market is changing. And today is the first of those podcasts. So I hope your Friday is going as well as mine. And I'm very excited to kick this off. What do you say?
Yeah, this how old is this idea? Like 12 hours?
That's about right.
15. Yeah, we were just DMing last night, and I'm like, yeah, I do like talking to people. Not only that, these are easy podcasts because we're just going to make the guests talk a lot. It's a ton easier that way, and for sure, no, I'm pumped about these all together, and we might even do a really fun one from Las Vegas eventually here before the season starts. So we have a good roster already in mind. The short list is looking pretty sharp.
Okay, right on. Well, I'm excited for our potential Las Vegas one as well. We are coming up on contest sign up here. I gotta start planning my trip out to the desert. Do you have a time in mind?
Yeah, I think we're going out on the weekend of I think I'll be there the first weekend of football as well. But I'm pretty sure we will be out there on the 12th for one of the sign up weekends and we haven't done one of these yet, but these previews and basically all the podcasts we do before football starts will be brought to you this fall by Circa and their contests. And this is me going to try to get through an ad read because I love to ad lib, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this straight. The biggest pro football overlays in Vegas are back with 12 million. That's a lot. I already ad libbed. Look at me. In guaranteed prizes only at Circa Sports. 2 ways to win with no rake. The Circa Sports Million with the quarterly payouts and the 100% payback. Again, no rake. And the Survivor. You can play Circa Survivor. You pick, one team each week. No point spreads. That's a bunch of money as well. 12 million in guaranteed prizes. Have to enter from Vegas, but you can play from anywhere. And we'll kind of help you along as we go through some of this stuff. We have a proxy we like. Probably should make him pay if we're gonna advertise for him. But once we get out to Vegas, we'll talk some proxy stuff too. But yes, these are going to be brought to you by the Circa Millionaire and Circa Survivor. And yeah, it's good synergy because our guest today has had some success in these Vegas contests over the years.
Yeah, I'm already figuring out how I'm going to get second place to our guest today. And that, of course, is the well-known on Twitter, Clev TA. TA, welcome back to the Deep Dive. You're at the top of the list of people I was hopeful we could start with from a conversation standpoint, because as far as I can tell you, you are ahead of the game in your preparation for the NFL season. And I know that because you put together one of the most useful and free resources that I've ever come across when it comes to just in general, what happened last year, what happened in the off season, a cheat sheet for lack of a better word, to catching up with the changes in the NFL landscape. So it's great to have you on. First of all, welcome back to the Deep Dive. How has your off season been?
It's been good, and I appreciate you guys having me back. I think it's been 3-4 years since I was on, so glad I'm back in the rotation. I'll see you guys in another 3-4 years probably, but no, just kidding. No, it's been good. I appreciate the kind words on the preview. That was something I put together really last minute. Wasn't really planning on doing anything that extensive. It was essentially precipitated by a message I got from somebody I know who works with a pretty well-known NFL analyst in the media space who was like, hey, I need a kind of crash course on the NFL and kind of a 2022 preview. Do you know anyone who's got one, or can you do one? And I said, sure, I'll just do one. So I hired a young kind of data scientist who's got some really good visualizations and helped me out with kind of the looks of a real professional preview, if you will. And then I just kind of grinded away and hammered all 32 teams out. And it was definitely a grind. And I wish I had a little more time, because he wanted it kind of before 4th of July weekend so he can read it on the beach, which was funny. So I really, really had to put a lot of extra effort into getting it done in time. And like I said, I kind of wish I had a little bit more time, because I think there's more to say and I could have expanded a little bit. But all in all, I think it worked out well. And, all he wanted and all I think is really needed is kind of 1 page per team. I don't need, an encyclopedia here of football knowledge. I just need, I think just, kind of a summary is good enough. Like I said, a cheat sheet. So that was really the hope, and, hopefully you got a lot of it. So.
Yeah, and I think, you kind of nailed it. I've enjoyed it as well. And again, it's free. I think producer Dan said he was going to tweet it out from the @DeepDivePod account, to kind of retweet the tweet of yours that has the link to it. You can just, go download the PDF. It is 1 page per team. And I think a lot of that comes down to people that would want the amount of data that goes into some of these books that have 10 pages per team. Those kind of people have their own models and data already. They, I have all this. This is a nice little and it is great for beginners or people that just want a little reminder. Like before we did the 4 podcasts we did this week, I read each page of yours, and there was always something. It's like, I'd kind of forgotten about that. There is just so many moving pieces, or just things you forget about last year. Honestly, a lot of that is last year. I read the Wikipedia pages for each, Wikipedia, 2021 Bears. And I just read that for 5 minutes to just get myself back in the mind space of remembering. Because how many times have we talked about this, Drew, too? The COVID years have really mushed together. 2 seasons kind of just mushed together at times. And it was good to totally grab what happened last year. And I think we did a pretty good job with the NFC North. We're going to do another fun one next week. But today we'll spend some time just talking about the process and whatnot. I think maybe a good question for you too, since you did do this work, and you already answered that, somebody helping you make it look nice. I think that was money well spent, because it does look very sharp. But was there something in the process of building that you kind of hit on that's this is the core usefulness for where you need to start your handicaps for each team, or setting up some of the, maybe it's the, everyone has power numbers, but some of the subjective stuff you have to put to some of these teams to really analyze where they're at?
Yeah, and I think it was just important to have kind of two. I wanted to lay it out in a way where if you just wanted the pure football side of things in terms of what happened from a free agency perspective, roster perspective, the draft. I've got that all. I've got the depth charts that currently are listed on from our lads, just all laid out for you. If you just want the football side of things, who's on what team, right? Because we always forget some of the transactions that were made in March. But then also, what happened last year? Let's review what happened last year. Was the team that won 10 games, or were they actually better than the team that won 7 or 8 games? Were there any luck factors involved there? Were they from a point differential perspective, from a close game perspective, did they get some lucky breaks? Were there any major injuries? All of those things, I think, combined play into what happened last year, and could potentially help you predict what's going to happen this year. And then obviously the schedule. Nothing is perfect. There's no exact science here when it comes to, even though a team was bad last year and you think it might be a quote unquote easy game, or vice versa this year, we know things change. So it's not perfect, but you get some sense of, overall, how does the schedule look from one year to the next? And, are there any major outliers in that case? And so I think all of those things were what I kind of planned to put together in the 1-page summaries. And like I said, if it's just a football thing, if you just want to know, who's on each roster and what are the changes, you can do that. And if you just want, hey, what are some of the nuances of, some of the close game numbers, some of the luck factors that maybe masked some of the 2021 results. You've got that all there. So I think it's kind of a little bit for everybody.
Yeah, you had a ton of that in, like I said, I haven't read the whole thing. I read 4 pages of it and some of the intro too. But I'm going to take time and focus on the teams. I'm actually
perfect bathroom material, Andy. Come on.
Yeah, it is. It's funny too. You say read on the beach. It's crazy how many people just sit there with their Phil Steele on the beach and I don't know. My wife reads mystery novels and stuff. And last year I was reading soccer analytics. We're a different breed sometimes, I think, but definitely good bathroom material. But I was going to say a lot of that, the context you put to stuff, because, you can't go too simplistic and say, here's the record last year. Because when you do, like you said, some of the luck, fumble luck, 1-score game luck, or some of that isn't luck, but knowing, you remember this team finished last in the division, but getting some of that context too helps a lot. They were probably, because there are teams where it's man, they were horrible, and then you look and oh my God, they had good fumble luck, and they had decent luck in injuries. They were still this bad. It almost adds an extra layer of. It's not always this team was unlucky. They should have been better. Sometimes a bad team actually was lucky and should have been worse. It is good to get that context to every team too when you're starting to evaluate. Because that's what you base your prior on is last year.
Yeah, no doubt. And I thought in general, you consolidated what used to take me 5 open tabs and 3 open PDFs in order to kind of have everything I needed to do a team preview. It's all now on one page, which I find to be unbelievably convenient. So thank you for that. And yeah, if you wanted to spend more time on it and make it longer, I would push back and say, no way, short and sweet. The editorial nature to it is absolutely on the nose. So there's no need to make it longer. Our Lads you mentioned is a huge resource for me. I always have that one open when we're doing a preview. What was last year's schedule? What is this year's schedule? What are the look ahead lines? What is the, implied strength of schedule? But the little box you have of kind of the luck factors is probably the hidden gem in all of it. Andy was mentioning, and I wanted to ask your current thoughts on how to apply that in a forward sense, because we talked about 4 teams in the NFC North this week, and it's, there's been pretty clear early market love for a team like the Lions and dislike for a team like the Packers. And if you just look at the Pythag expectation and how those teams performed relative to that expectation last year from a win standpoint, you should have been able to tell that the market was going to be hot on the Lions and cold on the Packers in a vacuum. Am I crazy?
Yeah, no, I think the market is really pricing that in the last couple of years more so than they used to. You could have cleaned up on a lot of these totals, back a decade ago, because there wasn't a lot of this kind of luck regression discussed, openly. And then I think it was Bill Barnwell actually was the first one that I recall back a handful of years ago who started talking about this sort of thing. And then the Football Outsider started doing it. And yeah, there's a lot of looking at what happened last year from a point differential in the Pythag win expectation and some of these turnover kind of luck metrics and all those sorts of things that should bounce back the next season. And so, that is already being priced in. Look at the Steelers. Now, I know the Steelers are, you lose Ben Roethlisberger, but let's be honest, he was a shell of himself last year anyway. So going from him to Trubisky or Pickett shouldn't be a big deal. But they had 9 wins, they had a tie, and I think are they sitting at 7 right now in their win total market? It's pretty substantial, and it's because they completely outplayed their Pythagorean win expectation. They had one of the worst point differentials you'll ever see from a playoff team. They were minus 55 points. There were 6 teams in the AFC and 3 in the NFC with a higher differential, didn't even make the playoffs. So, they got blown out a ton. And so that's already factored into, the win total market this year. And so when I mentioned, expanding, I didn't mean adding more pages to this, by the way. That's not what I was trying to do. But, I've got a guy who's helping me do some more research. And you were, kind of the proponent of some of this, Drew, in that, is there anything above just kind of close game numbers that we can look at that can help derive, who exceeded expectations a little bit more or underachieved. And so we're looking at more win probabilities in the fourth quarter of games, kind of before you get to the last couple of minutes. So using, again, this is still in draft form, but looking at, the first half of the first 6 minutes of the fourth quarter and kind of using a blended win probability. If you just kind of add those all up and compare that to the actual win percentage at the end of the season, who really exceeded or underachieved the most, and then look at how those teams, the kind of the outliers, perform the next season in a win total market. And if you just looked at the teams that overachieved, for example, like the Steelers, because they're a perfect one, if they overachieve by kind of the 80th percentile or higher in the database that we've been looking at since 2005, those teams, if you take their under the next season blindly, you're talking about a kind of 65%-ish win rate just by taking those unders. And and this is where you come in, Drew. You've always talked about the alternative lines, and it's because these they go under by over 2 games, almost 2.5 games on average. And so if you kind of apply hey, let's take the kind of alt lines by, what the alt lines are usually about a game off of the normal lines. You can get kind of a plus 185, 200 or so in some teams. Just take all of those. I mean, your ROI is through the roof. I mean, you're just sweeping in units here. So that's something that I'm going to continue to do more research on. But looking at all those things, I think can help you. I don't think it's coincidence that those teams really underperform the next season. It's your win-loss record, just like wins and losses for a quarterback, don't always explain everything. So long-winded answer to say that all of the kind of luck factors and the point differentials and the win probabilities in the fourth quarter, all those things can help you at least have some idea as to how a couple of these outliers could perform the next season. So I think that's all really important, and it's all part of the context, along with some of the roster changes and the coaching changes that can get you to some of these these type of ideas for what to look for in the win total market.
It's your answer. It's like we're doing this podcast in reverse, because like you just answered my next question I had. Well, and it wasn't even a question. It was like here's what you could add for next year. But it does feel like, Pythag is something you can look at to get a real general view. But it's funny, I brought up soccer analytics and, where XG has gotten from where it started. Like XG has gotten better, even though it's the same kind of stat. But before XG, I mean, you looked at the final score and then maybe you said, how many shots did they take? Right. Like, oh, they took a lot of shots, but they didn't make we didn't get a lot of score. And you felt like, I'm putting more context to this than just saying, Huddersfield lost 2-1. But, and it does feel like that's kind of where Pythag is at this point, where it's just points. All you're looking at is points, and there's so many more factors. And if somebody could take, looking at, and I know Rufus does some things with added EPA per turnover, and there's a few people that are working with but try to think of a play that has a bigger swing in win probability or just everything based in, some of these turnovers or maybe long touchdowns, I suppose. Some of that stuff really affects it depending how late you're in the game. But taking fumble luck, for example, and figuring out not only were they unlucky, but they were unlucky at horrible times. Just
Dalvin Cook fumbling in overtime in week 1.
Yeah. Oh, no, exactly. Because fumble luck is one thing, but if you have bad fumble luck and 80% of those fumbles are in the first and second quarter, it's not the same as having maybe middle of the pack fumble luck, but a lot of them are happening in high leverage spots.
Or a fumble at midfield. Fumble at midfield on 4th and 1. Big deal. Like a fumble at the goal line that takes 6 points off the board. That's massive, there is context around that for sure. I agree.
Well, and
look at
any number
Washington,
of things,
for example,
the win probability and seeing, what these massive plays that happened that swung win probability, was it just luck, or was this team is just bad? And putting some of that and actually coming up with a true, like you're saying, expectation for wins that team should have had, or a true expectation for even a game. Like, hey, this team lost. the odds said they were going to lose 60% of the time. But after the game, like, they probably should have won this game despite losing by 8. There was just so many high leverage spots that flipped things. Like that would be interesting to me. Like that would add such a layer of context to figuring out like what a team actually was for an entire season.
Yeah, I mean, look at the Lions, and I talked about in the section, like I think they lost 3 buzzer beaters, which happens, right? Like teams lose at the gun in terms of field goals or whatever. But like you lose on a 66-yard field goal to Justin Tucker, like that's, I mean, how can you model that going forward? Like I'll take my chances that it's going to happen again, and if that happens, those kind of wild swings like you mentioned a couple of times, that's where the outliers I think are important. And I haven't gotten to the point where I can model that going forward, but I think just contextually knowing that I think is important. Look at Washington would talk about when the turnovers occurred. Like they led the NFL with the most turnovers inside their own 10-yard line. Like they had like 4 or 5 of them. It was pretty ridiculous. Dallas, how many times did you get a Trevon Diggs pick 6? Like there's just, is that repeatable? It's not. They also were one of the worst defenses in the NFL when it comes to explosive pass rates allowed. Like they were a high leverage team when it comes to, they're either going to get a pick 6 or they're going to get burned deep. And it's like, I'll take my chances that the burn deep's going to happen more often going forward than the pick 6. So, again, having those at least, and that's what I tried to do here, I think is important and, can help you, decide whether, like, do I really think Dallas's defense is that good? Is there DVOA? Is there EPA? Are those real? Or are those just completely elevated by these unsustainable, Micah Parsons strip sacks left and right, and these digs?
True that
I think
the 18 Bears defense, like the Trubisky half year, like, and that's where maybe even not even so team specific, but if you identify a team, and I'm going to pick on that, I think it was the 18 Bears, the team that went like 12 wins. Like if you go look at the defense and the amount of turnovers and I think if you went and looked at, the win probability shifts on those turnovers, there were so many that were such big spots, and that team was good, but they turned into probably a great team on the back of that. And maybe that's not the kind of team that competes in a playoff game all the time because it's a much, much smaller sample and you need that to continue. But I think even without looking at the numbers, we just kind of picked on that team the next year and said like, hey, guess what? The Bears probably can't just do that again. And I think if you looked back at enough history and said like, just, hey, teams that do this sort of thing on defense or even on offense that have this many explosive plays that are, 2 standard deviations off what a normal team should have, you can just say like, this team probably isn't doing it again because we have 50 record teams doing this and nobody did.
Oh, it absolutely cuts both ways too. I mean, the Bears did it for so many years with the fumble luck, the forced fumbles that
Tillman, right?
It did. Yeah, that's right. They like either the positional coaches or the personnel they had played into that. But at some point, it was going to change. And it goes both ways because I remember the year that the Niners had 2 interceptions. 2 interceptions on 500 attempted passes against them or something insane. Like the rate was so it was like 5 standard deviations off of a normal team.
Didn't they have 2 picks in the first half of week 1 the next year?
And then the week 1 the next year they had 2 picks in the first. Exactly. Yeah, and it was like those types of things where you have outlier stuff and it is either telling you that the defense is better or worse than actual than it actually is very valuable to identify in the preseason port. And I think you picked on the Dallas Cowboys. Completely fair in my mind. That was one of the luckiest defenses in the NFL last year. Not just the turnover stuff that you referenced, but they had a lot of high leverage and a lot of fluky stuff that happened. Just who they got to face, when they got to face, some third down stuff. Like basically every non-repeatable metric was in their favor last year. If you're going to tell me Dan Quinn's going to do it, run it back and be just as good, I'll put my money against that anytime. So,
but even that one, hey, Drew, not to interrupt, but Andy talked about the point differential. Like with Dallas, what they were, they were either number 1 or number 2 in point differential. I don't remember, but like. Look a little bit deeper. I mean, they won that Week 18 game against the Eagles when the Eagles sat everybody, and I have no idea why Dallas played everybody, but they won that game, going away. They beat the Washington team that was coming off that short. Remember that was a Monday COVID kind of extended, that their game got pushed to Monday against the Eagles or Tuesday, whatever it was. A bunch of guys still out, and then Dallas destroyed them on Sunday night by like 30. Like, okay, those two games are gonna, that's gonna help your point differential. So you go from, if you just excluded those, like they go from, they probably should have won more games based on Pythag, but if you exclude those games, they won about what they should have just on point differential. So
that's
a
good point about. Yeah, but good point about the Pythag. And like I mentioned, it was flawed. I didn't really get into it, but I think you kind of pointed to a really good example of it is like when you have a blowout, and it's not just we really played well and did everything perfect. It's like the other team was in a horrible spot and you were in a great spot, or, it was an injury one. Let's say the Saints, what did they win? What was that score in Denver that year against, was that 30-0?
When they were up against Kendall Hinton?
Whatever
that guy, the wide receiver who was playing quarterback?
Yeah, like that's included in your Pythag is a blowout against a wide receiver starting, or, some of these teams that have had COVID issues or cluster injuries or just horrible travel spots. And let's say you score 4 touchdowns, like with the backups, and your win probability was already sitting at like 85% before you score those. Like that shouldn't count the same as, things scored in 1-score games against, like you're doing with the schedule, Drew. If you could actually look at like, where are these teams at as far as rest and travel and an injury, and see where they lined up. If one's in a massive disadvantage, maybe you should have some sort of weighted Pythag for that sort of game.
Yeah, no, I you're never going to clean it all perfectly, and there's always going to be anecdotes like we're pulling out of the back of our brain because they're so outrageous. But like normalizing it or cleaning the data in a way that your Pythag is informed by the whatever the score differential was when the win probability was at a certain level at a certain time of the game makes sense. Because if your win probability is 98% in the second quarter, like you should lock it at that point. Like that should have a certain positive score for your team, right? Regardless of what happens after that point, because who the hell cares if you then add 4 more touchdowns, or if the team then closes to, the gap from 28 to 14, like you should still be rewarded with the fact that in the second quarter of a game, you had a 98% win probability, right? And then the vice versa, like you were pointing out with the fourth quarter, if you're going into the final 4 minutes and the win probability is 50%, like that should be what your game score reflects, not whatever the ultimate outcome ends up being. Because, in the case of like, Bills Chiefs playoff game, right? Like that was a 6-point margin because of a coin flip. Like that shouldn't give the Chiefs any kind of a +6 in any kind of, standardized metric, right? So there's definitely not a framework that I can point to of how you can go about circumventing this. But I guess at this point, Pythag is what it is. It's going to influence the market early. You just need to know that. And so I don't think you can look at steam on a given team that underperformed or overperformed their Pythag last year and read anything more than just, okay, well, that was the market correction because of the Pythag bettors bet it in May or whatever. Like, I feel like that you can pretty much set your watch to that at this point. And it's not going to give you anywhere close to the edge that it used to. So don't bet it blindly. But I love the idea of coming up with a unique way to identify lucky or unlucky teams and applying that in an alt market. Like, that's music to my ears. So,
what's funny? What's funny, Drew, real quick. So, because as I'm looking at more of the data, I thought, a lot of the stuff was already priced in the market, like I mentioned with Pittsburgh. But if you look at, and this is separate from Pythag, this is just the win probability stuff I was talking about. If you just, parsed out the teams that you think that the market's already pricing a lot of this regression in. So essentially, is their win total kind of 2 wins lower than what they actually ended up with the prior season? So it's already priced in. How did those teams do with, some of the analysis that we're looking at? And actually, it was even better. It was like 74% to the under, and it's strange. So it's already being priced in, and they still went under by a significant amount. So that was interesting to me. And like I said, I'm digging in more, but those are the type of things I think are interesting because, again, Pythag's been kind of wrung to death. I think everyone already knows it's way more public than anything else. So, but it's a good starting point, I think, for kind of the average bettor who doesn't know too much or is just trying to figure out. I think
that warms my heart too, because we're keeping the old school sharps in business. We're keeping them in the game. I don't want the old school sharps to go out a sad death. I'm glad that there's still some value there. That's huge. Let me ask you, pivot a little bit to kind of the process for the. Unless Andy, you have any final points on this?
And one last thing, because it's funny. Like my first bet were, I used to. We've talked ad nauseum about how we used to bet when we were younger, and we were shitty bettors. We tried to pick winners and tried to, just bet on teams with good players. And Drew, you just bet on the Patriots and Duke because you're from New England and went to Duke, and that worked out. If I'd have done that sort of thing, I'd have been betting on South Dakota State and the Vikings, and shit would have gone tits up in a hurry. But no, I get to thinking about years ago. This is probably 5-6 years ago. This was like my first one where it's like, oh my God, I know something no one knows. And it was a year that the Texas Rangers, had an absurd one-run game record. Maybe even longer ago, but like they had an absurd record in close games. And I remember thinking, I'm just going to bet against them next year. And then I did, and it did come through, but I like, you realize like, the whole world knew that. It was probably priced in. You were probably still paying 3 or 4 games premium at that point. I mean, it came down to the last 2 weeks of the season, I believe, but I think a lot of that does go to what you said. It's like, it's public now. And for the most part, take it with a grain of salt and actually dig in on some of these games if you want to get at least a true understanding of how a team was last year.
Yeah, but the even broader point, there is still freaking edge to be mined. There absolutely is. And
the average team misses their win total by over 2 games.
It's over 2 games.
You figured it out over like a 5-year sample. It was 2 games.
Yeah, right. More teams finish a game away than finish within a game, like over an enormously large sample, which is absolutely crazy. And it's not priced that way still, even today.
No,
but that's a discussion for another pod, or we don't ever have to talk about it. That's fine too. I guess pivoting back to sort of the process of putting together your guide, I have found kind of through doing this podcast and just talking in general about NFL, like you learn something or you're surprised by things just because of doing something different, right? Were there any examples of that as you kind of started putting this together that you were like, wow, I really thought that was a valuable part of my process and it's useless, or vice versa, as you were kind of going through and establishing, this guide?
I think some of the, I didn't talk as much about kind of rest in the schedule. And I know you do some stuff on that, Drew. So you have more than me. I haven't seen anything that's really been that predictive from this team has a net rest advantage of X versus this team, so this team should overperform. I haven't really seen that come to light, because every year I'm like, okay, this is going to be, but this team has got, I think Carolina had like the best net rest advantage last year. It didn't matter. I think the Patriots had like the worst, and they obviously exceeded expectations. It was just like, all right, well, is there really any value there? And I've seen some of the PFF guys have posted that there's really no, intrinsic value in just pure net rest advantage. So I think that from that perspective, I kind of strayed away from using kind of rest as anything that's just more of just a descriptive, kind of a fun thing to put out there. I think you probably have done way more work on this than me. There's probably really specific examples of, maybe it's 3 and 4 road games, and 3 road games in 4 weeks or something like that, or amount of miles traveled can maybe that translates into affecting the point spread or the outcome. I'm not sure, but from my perspective, that didn't really stick out too much, and I left that out more than I expected to going in. It was just, there really was no predictive value from what I've seen. So I didn't really want to go too much into the net rest more than maybe I could have a year or two ago. So that's probably the one thing that I left out that maybe wasn't sure I was going to or not.
Yeah, I think rest advantage from a bye was correctly priced 4 or 5 years ago, basically in the spread. Yeah. And so anything from then, if anything has happened, it has become less of a factor in distinguishing teams in a given week. Particularly, and this is super narrative-y, so it sounds stupid to even bring it up on what has otherwise been a very high-level conversation so far. But like, if you're doing well going into your bye week, it almost feels like the players take a little bit less seriousness of preparation coming out of it, and vice versa. If you're struggling going in, it feels like there's a double down. We're going to use this week to really freaking fix things, right? And maybe it's the coaching staff, maybe it's the players, maybe it's both. I don't really know. But it almost seems to matter more, like sort of the state of the team heading into and coming out of, than even the fact that you have an extra week to get right. The get right thing is also somewhat hidden in there, right? Like the weeks where I see a bye made a big difference, there was a week where I was like, okay, this meaningful role player who was missed X amount of weeks because of an injury, like they targeted getting him right to come back after the bye, right? Like that happens a lot for sure. And in those instances, you do see a bump with the team just because it's a different team. It's a different roster. It has more, like the coaches are more willing to call the good plays that involve that player because now he's back, right? Like that's definitely an aspect. Where I do think the market is still a little light on is just the smaller rest advantages, right? And we've talked about this, a bunch. People probably are getting closer to correctly pricing this now, but coming off of a Thursday week where, your guys aren't cut loose for an entire week, right? Like the new CBA, the guys aren't even in the building for the entire week of the bye, which good for them. That's what they wanted. But at the same time, like, if you have that mini bye after a Thursday night game where your coaches are now given extra time to prepare, extra time to break down film, your guys are getting a little bit of body rest, extra relative to the other team. Like I do think that still does manifest an advantage. And then the last kind of point I want to make about the rest, as far as the schedule in a macro sense, I enjoy looking at it in the context of what is the NFL trying to do to certain teams, right? Like, I subscribe to the idea that the NFL wants to have a parity broadly across many seasons. And I'm always fascinated to see a team like the Packers this year, where it feels like the NFL legitimately gave them a stretch through the middle of their schedule where they have rest disadvantage week after week after week. And it's like, is that an accident, or are they literally just trying to enforce some parity? And that is interesting to me, just in terms of like, what is the NFL trying to do with the way they sequence the schedule? I feel like even, going back to the Lions, they gave the Lions massive rest advantage this year. You brought up the Panthers. They gave the Panthers massive rest advantage last year. It felt like that was the NFL trying to nudge those franchises back into the discussion a little bit. Am I crazy? But Andy, did you buy into any of that?
I'd like to hear what TA says about this, because I kind of have a slightly different thought about the bye I wanted to ask as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the one thing with the bye, I think the focus is really the issue, and I think the state of the team is, you're right. I think that's the interesting aspect, and maybe you have to dig in more, but maybe road teams, because wasn't it road teams off the bye that were favored were like just a huge ATS winner, and then I think last 2 years it's kind of reversed. So I think all that stuff has been priced in. So I'm not sure, where there is, if there's an edge there, but it's all about focus and about what the specific team state is. So I think that part is right. I'm not sure about the other part that you mentioned, Drew. I mean, I'd like to hear Andy's thoughts on it. I'm not sure if they're, I try to stay away from kind of what the media, what the NFL is doing to certain teams and those sorts of things. I know, it's not something I like to focus on. So
it's not to say that it works at all.
Right.
I just find it interesting, right? Like there's obviously a lot of thought that goes into the sequencing of the schedule. They're trying to make money in ways X, Y, and Z. They're trying to have a big week the week after baseball is over, sweeps week, blah, blah, blah. They're trying to drive ratings. They're trying to give all of the major markets a little bit of primetime love. But if it's a team that they think is going to suck, that they give them more of that love early in the season before the team is a total afterthought, right? Like you can glean a lot about sort of the NFL's front office's opinions of the franchises just by looking at the sequencing, if you're kind of reading between the lines, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you could be right.
The only pushback I would have on this is it's incredibly difficult to build a schedule for this many teams. And I'm sure, they're not doing it by hand on a chalkboard, but it's still incredibly difficult to get this all sorted out. We talked about this once. Plus, you have two teams sharing a stadium that you have to manage. You have, every team has to play these certain teams at certain times, and they have to have the right amount of road and away. And then you have to throw in these London games. You throw in the buys. Like, I just think it's so difficult to actually put the schedule together in the first place. It just feels hard for me to stomach the, like, they're trying to screw this team or they're trying to make it tougher on a good team. I mean, it's part of it. They do try to make it tougher on good teams. A first place team plays a first place, schedule. So that part of it is built in. But yeah, some of these rest things, like to Drew's point, I say all that, but then I still put the tinfoil on at the end and say some of these rest spots are really difficult for some of the good teams or really easy for some bad teams. And again, going back to the buy thing, and I think this ties in well with the, what we've all talked about with I almost said XG again, the Pythag, is to start putting together some stuff. And I do this lightly, and this is, again, something I'm really going to try to do better at the onset of this season, is the game grades I'm giving for each team and deciding, like, because at the end of it, a lot of times I do it and I go through the box score. I do my game grading. I look at some of the high leverage stuff that happened. And I said, like, man, they probably shouldn't have won this game at all. And I wonder how often these teams, these coaches, these front offices will actually say that out loud. Like, hey, we're 3-0, but we should be 2-1. Like, we got some lucky fumbles. We got a fluky touchdown. We won a coin toss in overtime. Like, I don't know if a team is 3-0 and maybe even in their heart of hearts, they absolutely know all this information and they say, we should be 2-1. We're a 2-1 team who's lucky. That team does not prepare for week 4 the same way that a team who is 1-2, where it's still such a weird bias looking at your own record. And I think, again, going into, and I'm going to build to the bye because the bye will exacerbate all this, but a team that has a bad record is a team that's forced to make changes. And you'll see them, like, we're working on something. The game plan is going to be changing. The game plan on defense perhaps is changing. The personnel, the rotations on the defensive line, the sequencing for the play calling. We know again that there's coaches and there's staffs that will not make changes because they live in Seattle and that's just not what we do. But again, when I'm looking at a team that's like, man, they know they have to be doing something different, and then they have a bye, like that's a big catalyst for me to hopefully give them some sort of bump the next week, because it's like, this is a shitty team that has underperformed. And I think they're going to do something different with this offense because they have the capability. They have the coaching staff in place that will make changes, and they have 2 weeks to figure it out. Like, that's a huge spot and it doesn't come up all that often because you need a lot of things coming into it.
You know what you're describing. You're describing the NBA team down 0-2 going home.
It kind of
that's
is.
Basically the same concept. And I mean, we're talking about a small sample size. So you have a 7-game series, you have a 17 game season. Like, this is all small sample size. You can't afford not to make changes. And so basically that checks out. That checks out in the concept entirely. But I think it still comes down to, do you have a coach that's willing to make changes? Right.
Yeah, like, sometimes you got to throw it out the window.
Yeah. If the Seahawks go into their bye 0 whatever, on a 4-game losing streak, and their playoff chances are diminishing this year, and you're telling me Pete Carroll is going to figure out, like, oh no, he's like, no, we need to fix the running game. Right. Like, we're going to double down on what's not working. Like that would be my expectation. Right. Whereas if you have, something going wrong with either a young coach who, whatever he's, maybe a first year, maybe it's KOC of the Minnesota Vikings, as we were kind of laying out on the pod this week. Like, if they get off to a poor start and things aren't quite working and they go into their bye forced to make some changes, I'll bet on the Vikings in a heartbeat coming out of that, just on the basis of kind of assuming that, that they'll take the lessons learned over the first half of the season and apply them in the second half. So I totally agree with that in concept, but I still think you have to have some read on the coach and, just their what is their nature? What is their ability? And what do they have to work with? Because even a good changes from a coaching standpoint might not matter if there's no skill position players to pull it off, or if there's zero talent on the defense to plug all the leaky holes, right? So, I think case by case is still important on that, but conceptually that checks out in every way. Pivoting to coaching for TA, what in your off-season process do you do about trying to evaluate new coaching hires at the offensive and defensive coordinator level?
Yeah, I would say that I haven't done as much because I just don't know how to utilize it. I mean, it's the ones that are obvious, like the Brian Daboll, right, replacing whatever was going on with New York the last couple of years. Like, that's an easy one. That's a glaring one. We know that Daboll throws a lot on early downs, and it kind of spreads the field, gets his playmakers the ball, and so that's kind of your hope for Daniel Jones and the Giants. I mean, that's kind of easy. You don't need too much analysis there. You're talking about O'Connell. Is he going to bring the McVay kind of 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver sets, and kind of eliminate what Mike Zimmer has been doing for the last handful of years in terms of going 2 wide receivers all the time and running it so much on first down? Yeah, like those are kind of easy to see, and I think that would be applied more, maybe in the player futures market or a props market. Maybe a Kirk Cousins most passing yards or something like that. I think you could apply that too. And that's probably something I'll dig in a little bit more here. And I think you see that more in training camp. I would probably wait to see it practices, because you'll see the people talk about the types of personnel groupings, and that's more visual. And I think that you'll get a better sense there. So I haven't done as much on kind of in the weeds with some of these kind of random coordinator changes. But, I think once training camp begins, you'll see some of those changes. And there are a lot of good people on social media who tweet about, especially the fantasy guys, who tweet about like how often guys are on the field and what the personnel groupings are and kind of the philosophies. So that's stuff that I'll probably see more of as we get into the training camp.
Okay. But in general,
you're
good. Yeah, good.
But well, we've only been through 4 teams.
Yeah.
And we already have
4 new.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing too. We have, like, how are you supposed to evaluate it if you don't know the answers to, like, at this point the Lions are not telling us if it's Ben Johnson or our guy Campbell calling the plays. They said they'll decide over the summer. Like it's still up in the air. It's probably getting decided like during camp, during preseason.
Jesus Christ.
So you have that, and so you don't even know who's calling plays there, and then you have KOC, who really hasn't called plays, and people are just blindly saying, well, you're getting the McVay experience. They're right, but to what degree? Like, you're not getting Mike Zimmer, but you're not getting Sean McVay. You're getting something in between, and the hope is, if you're banking on that, is it's a lot closer to McVay than not. So I think, more 11 personnel, 3 receivers on the field, more early down passing, but you can't just say definitively how much. So it's probably something we maybe spend too much time on, because there aren't definitive answers, and it's very difficult.
I think recognizing this is a huge uncertainty is valuable, and talking it out, at least to kind of understand the range before the season starts, is important. And then, that helps you act on it once you start to get some information, right? Like, I'm going to have a much softer band around the Vikings offense than I would, a team that has an established play caller, an established quarterback relationship going back 5 years. Right. So I think it's still valuable, but I don't have the answer, which is why I was curious if TA had kind of a general philosophy. But the idea of camp is an interesting one, and actually pivots to my next question almost perfectly. Like, is there a camp battle or a camp report that you are the most excited to get over the next couple of weeks as teams start to open camp?
Oh boy, I don't know. I mean, I think everyone is curious to see what happens with Trey Lance, right? Like, look
number one
in practice, and is he the real deal? Yeah, that has to be the number one thing. I mean, otherwise it's probably what happens in Pittsburgh, but does it really matter between Trubisky and Pickett? I mean, they're kind of the same. I don't know. I mean, those are probably the ones off my head that I would be thinking that will be top of mind. But otherwise here, obviously in Cleveland, looking to
Who's
see
gonna
what
say you
finally
missed
happened with Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
What's
I
that?
was going to say you missed one locally. That's
Yeah. Well,
we've seen enough
I've been so
reports of one
inundated
way or
with
the
it.
other. Yeah, they still just
Oh yeah.
a wild amount of reports on what's happened. I just actually got an alert on my phone while we're doing this saying he has settled with all of his accusers, all 30 accusers at this point.
Jesus
I don't know
Oh,
if
yeah,
that
he
means
did.
anything to the NFL, but at least the legal side of it appears to be pretty much over, and now we just need to see where we're sitting. And it's still, they have plenty of time before the season to decide on this. I don't know if there's some sort of deadline in the collective bargaining agreement on when they have to tell him he's suspended. I'm guessing that is a thing. I just don't know what that date is because it is a long document that I will not read.
I don't have any inside information on this at all. There was some pretty strong whispers about a week and change ago that Cleveland was in talks with San Francisco to bring in Jimmy G, which to me read like they were expecting a year. Recent good, give our competitors / friends a pat on the back. The Circles Off guys had one of the Circa head linesmaker or NFL linesmaker Chris Bennett on this week and went through the whole discussion of, well, how do you change the win total when that news drops, right? Like how much of it is already built into the market. And it was fascinating because my assumption was that the current market price assumes it's Jacoby Brissett or some equivalent for the balance of the season. Like, I don't know that you can read that number any other way. What is your, if you had to come up with power numbers for the different alternatives here, TA, how much does your power number change if it's Brissett for 17 games, if it's Jimmy G for 17 games, or if it's Watson for some meaningful portion of the season, let's say 11 games?
Yeah, I mean, I think just I get way more activity or just kind of messages and just hearing about on my timeline and just discussions with people about the Watson stuff than I'm sure you guys do. But so I've been hearing consistently that I think it's in the 6 to 8 range. If I had to guess, I've been saying that kind of since day one. I know that the rumors were a year and all that sort of thing, but it didn't sound like from a legal side of things that even get to that. But if it's, let's call it half a season, just to be fair. I mean, I think Brissett is a little bit better than I think the general public thinks of him, just because he's never really had any surroundings. If you look at what he had in Miami and look at what he had with the Colts, he had 0 offensive line. I mean, Miami had like literally the worst offensive line known to man. If you look at PFF's numbers last year, the Colts had some bad ones a couple of years ago. No running game with either team. So he finally gets a real offensive line, top 5 to 10 offensive line, the best running game in the NFL, a good play caller. He can be you kind of see it with the Carolina game where it sounds like, if you look at the number, they're favored by 1, I believe. And that pretty much assumes a 95% chance that he's going to start over assuming Watson's sitting. But if Watson plays, I think that number jumps to 6.5. I think that's fair. So I think you get about a 5 to 5.5 point difference between the two. So you prorate that over the season and you go from, I think with Watson, the Browns are a 10 to 11, maybe they're 10 to 10.5 win total team with Brissett, they're likely, an 8-win team. I think that's kind of the way I would look at it. So, I think they clearly are a Super Bowl contender with Watson, and with Brissett, they're just kind of hanging around the hoop at around 500, if I had to guess.
You know what they're going to be? They're going to be the pain in the ass that the New Jersey Nets. Jesus fuck, Andy, how old are you? The Brooklyn Nets were supposed to be. Do you remember that? It's like, oh no, this is a super team who got a 7 seed. Like if they get 8 games with Brissett and it just ho hum, and then Watson comes in and plays to his ceiling, and they're like, this is some wild card team that's like, well, shit, the way they're playing. If they were like this all year, this is a top 2 seed, and this is very annoying if you're like the division winner that has to face the Browns. Like it
matters who they play. Look at the first 4 games. Yeah, look at the first 4 games.
Their schedule is backloaded like a mother. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. I mean, they're going to be favored, or maybe a pick 'em in each of the first 4 games. You're at Carolina, you're home to the Jets, you're home to the Steelers, and you're at Atlanta. I mean,
okay.
Realistically,
the number one,
you should win 3 of those games.
So the number one Cleveland analytics account in the NFL says 4-0 Cleveland Browns. We got ourselves a QB controversy. Are we even bringing in Watson? What can we get for Watson? That's the discussion in the middle of October up in Cleveland. Okay, got it.
I'm kind of with him on Brissett though. Brissett is fine.
I'm with you too. Yeah, he's perfectly fine.
And really good point about Brissett has had a few times where he's been stepped in, and it's like, man, this guy doesn't have a lot around him right now, and he's doing.
I think he's above. He's above replacement level. There's no doubt about that. And I didn't love honestly the Jimmy G kind of buzz because I was like, is that even an upgrade? I don't really know that it is. But that said, really important question for you. What is your autopsy on the Baker Mayfield era and why it didn't work? Man, I lost a lot of money thanks to that guy last year. And I'm still
get a full hour on this.
I do not have the answers yet. Like I don't get it. But have you kind of processed what happened and have any kind of an autopsy for us?
I mean, my summary of the Baker Mayfield era in Cleveland is when you put, the really good surroundings in terms of a great offensive line, you get great pass protection, you have a really good running game, you get a good, coach calling plays. Like he's fine. Like he can win you 10 games like he did 2 years ago against bad defenses. He can certainly look like a top 10 quarterback. Perfectly fine, right? But he cannot elevate any roster. He proved that time and time again. When the offensive line started to get some injuries last year, he started to get more pressure. He's awful under pressure, especially in the pocket when you force him to roll out. You had the OBJ situation. He was missing throws left and right. And obviously he was hurt. Like we know that. So he's not as bad as he showed last year, but he's clearly not a top, 10, 12 quarterback. Assuming you have kind of an average roster around him. He never whenever there was a chance for him to take the team and put it on his shoulders and a last 2-minute drive to tie a game or send it overtime or get in a field goal range, he could just never do it. I think there's only like 2 or 3 times in the 4 years that he was in Cleveland that I could recall him ever like taking them down for a game-winning drive or a game-tying drive. And so he just never could do that. He's great as a front runner. He's excellent at that, but he is not a guy that is going to elevate anybody around him. So, he's serviceable. He'll probably bounce around the league a couple times. He'll win you some games, but he's never going to be that guy that, you really are entrusting for your franchise for the 10 years. And then, off the field, he's kind of an asshole. Like just clearly, he rubs people the wrong way. He doesn't get along with everybody in the coaching staff. There's a reason why, time and time again, no matter whether he's at Texas Tech and he has a falling out with Kingsbury and he transfers, he had a falling out with Hugh Jackson. He's fired. They bring in Freddie Kitchens and he has a falling out with Freddie Kitchens. And then they bring in Stefanski and those guys butt heads. I mean, Stefanski is a mild manner Ivy League guy and Mayfield's kind of a brash, we'll comment, we'll talk to the media and we'll call out the play calling and those sorts of things. And it's just not something that Stefanski or Andrew Berry or any of that front office really wanted to see from him or from any franchise quarterback. That's why you got those comments about, needing an adult in the room. That's what they're talking about. They need a guy who's going to lead. He's not going to open up his mouth every time, a ref has a bad day, lost them the game. And he's not going to call out the play calling and those sorts of things. So all of that added up to, look, even if Jacoby Brissett is, call it a game, less win per season than Mayfield, if that's fair, we're okay winning 8 games with Brissett and not dealing with any of that stuff off the field in the locker room versus, maybe 9 games with Baker. Like that's what they made that decision. So he was never coming back. Any of those stories that you saw about, hey, maybe if Watson gets a full year, you could bring back Baker Mayfield. He's the best option. Like, okay, they wanted him out no matter what. And that was all it was.
You've been such a tremendous guest. How big of an asshole
do you have to be?
Oh God!
To win the Browns their first playoff game in like a million
and
years,
still and play your way out.
You. Yeah. Nobody likes you.
Yeah, I you've been such a tremendous guest. I almost feel bad doing this, but how many games do the Browns win this year with Josh Allen?
With Josh Allen? Wow.
Well, they took Baker Mayfield over Josh Allen, right?
I wanted them to take.
I mean, let's be honest.
Josh
The
Rosen.
Josh Allen transformation. I've never seen a quarterback. You guys tell me if I'm wrong. That
no.
From that inaccuracy to
never.
I mean, it's
not ever.
Yeah, I mean, what he did is you got to give him credit for that. If you put Josh Allen on this roster, I mean, they're probably the Super Bowl contenders. Not probably, they are.
They're favorites, right?
Super Bowl favorites. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's why I think a slight step down.
If they had what would have been your reaction if they had?
That's why they went after him.
Yeah, what would have been? Yeah, no, totally. What would have been your reaction at the time if they had taken Josh Allen over at 1.1 in that draft?
You can go look at my Twitter timeline from nobody. I mean, I was totally against. I don't think anybody who studies the analytics and the numbers and sees that you don't improve accuracy for going from Wyoming to the NFL. Like that just had never happened to this level. So I don't think anybody was really a proponent of taking him with the number one pick. It's just too hard to conceive. And the guy had a cannon, but it was just all over the field. And so I did not want him. Truth be told, I was dead wrong. I mean, you got to give him all the credit in the world for transforming his accuracy. So, that was not something that I considered. I wanted Sam Darnold, to be honest. So I was wrong on both ends, needless to say. So
I was going to say, I liked Darnold. I liked Darnold. I liked Rosen. I did not care for Mayfield, which looked dumb at first. Now it's starting to come around, but I didn't neither of us like Josh Allen.
No.
We constantly got in fights with and it pisses me off because these stupid Bills fans weren't right. They were gifted with, and again, I credit to Josh Allen and especially credit to the coaches who helped him along to find what he has now. Because like you've said, you've never seen a transformation with a glaring part of a quarterback's arsenal. And accuracy is a big one. You don't see people just suddenly get way more accurate. So whatever they did, put that in a bottle and sell it because
I mean the coaching, you have to give the coaching a slice, but I think it almost speaks more to who Allen is as a person, that he was able to kind of identify within himself what he needed to work on the most.
Yeah,
and then deal with that. I mean, maybe there is someone who deserves the ultimate credit for pulling it off, but I'm starting to come around on maybe it was just that Allen is that unique of a character where he was humble enough to be like, okay, well, in order to make this work, this is what I have to fix, and he fixed it, which is crazy.
You don't think? You're telling me you don't think
people.
You don't think? You don't think Danny Dimes can be Josh Allen in the Dayball system?
I have some takes that aged like spoiled milk from last offseason, where we were getting word that Drew Lock was working with Carson Palmer's brother, the guy that fixed Josh Allen, and I was like, Palmer, well, Jordan Palmer, he fixed Josh Allen. What if he does it for Drew Lock? No, he didn't. That was a one of one. I think that the more time goes on, the more that will become apparent. And I don't mind buying stock in Josh Allen for the long-term future, just because I feel like if you have that much humility that you can kind of double down and fix exactly the things that are, weak about your game to become great, that's a unique characteristic. We just don't have many of those. I definitely, that draft, I was literally like, we must have had some takes like, how did Bill Belichick convince the Bills to draft Josh Allen? Like, what kind of wizardry went on behind the scenes to pull this off? But, at this moment, I don't think you can take anyone over Allen in the NFL for building a franchise, even Pat Mahomes. As crazy as that may sound, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah, the recipe is, you got to find the guy, you got to have the coaching, and it's all got to come together. And the rest of the roster, it's not like it's simple to put the rest of a roster together, but it's a lot simpler if you have a top 5 quarterback and
under a rookie contract when he had.
Yeah, for sure. So no doubt.
Yeah, getting it to happen quickly. Yeah, getting it under that first contract, that's how you win a Super Bowl right now.
And also helps to be 6'5" and whatever 230,
for sure,
like a linebacker, because that really
I'm halfway there.
Game has transformed everything. That his ability to just and that's the thing. That's what I wonder what they're going to do when you look at the Bills' win total. Not to go discuss them specifically, but. They're probably going to save him, right? They didn't run him until the end of the year.
If they don't, it's malpractice. Yeah.
Yeah.
If they don't, if they get him,
yeah, they're unstoppable when he runs the ball and they get him on those sweeps, especially at the goal line. My God, when I had the Bills at home in that Monday night against New England, and the fact that they just would not run him inside the 10 was just killing me. And then they finally started after that. Of course, after I lose that game. But yeah, that makes that offense essentially unstoppable when he is running, 10, 15 times on those design sweeps. And that's what makes him so unique is he essentially was Cam Newton on steroids from, when Cam Newton was the MVP. Like that's what he is. And he's even a better version of that. And that's really hard to stop. And we'll see if hopefully his body kind of holds up, because you can't do that for the long run. And he's going to have to be a pocket passer eventually. But for now, he's as good as it gets.
Yeah, no disagreement. We could end there. All right, man. Well, appreciate all the insight as always. Where can people find all of your stuff, and what do you have planned for this upcoming season?
Yeah, so I started a site last year at cleveanalytics.com. It's kind of on a whim. Just put some. Every week, I literally write up every single game of the week, give matchup data, some a bunch of stats that I think are important. Go through injury reports. Like I really go through the offensive lines and the secondary more than you see what's out there, and kind of give a little bit of everything for people who are looking for either if you want to see what I'm wagering on, if you want DFS for DFS purposes, for fantasy, for survivor pools, whatever. You can use all of that information, all my write-ups, to do whatever you want with it. So it was successful last year. I had a good year, and hopefully we'll have another good year and see you guys in the Circa contest. Maybe, I don't know. You guys going to do Circa only? I'm assuming, and we'll have to have a little side competition, maybe.
Oh, now we're talking. This sounds good. Well, I'm worried about how much good karma you're stacking on your plate by providing the guide for free. That was quite the magnanimous gesture to the community. So we appreciate you for that.
No, absolutely. I hope everyone enjoyed it and hope they can get something out of it. Is really the hope. So I thought it turned out well. And I think I had Chargers and Tampa in the Super Bowl. It was kind of I didn't really want to put Tampa in there, but
I hate those picks.
Well, the thing is, like Tampa was one of those where the NFC is just so wide open, and it's I don't love anybody, but that's probably the easiest one to stick in there. The likeliest, so not something that I love, but I have to do that.
I think I'm not to the place where I'm ready to plant my flag yet, but I think first game, last game of the season are the same game, and I'll let you figure out what that means. But the
Rams, Buffalo, huh?
Yeah, I think that's
I'm anti-Rams this year, so that'll be interesting.
Ooh, their schedule is so damn easy. It's crazy.
Are we going to go reverse on the Rams? We're going to be really pro Rams in the preseason, and then
one of these years.
That's a good question.
We did flip.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to hit you up on the side to figure out what the bear case is for the Rams, because that they got the extra home game because they're in the NFC. One of their road games is against the Chargers in LA. And right. Just in general, they got the champions pat on the back of a schedule, as far as I could tell you. So we'll see.
Yeah, and I'll let you know what my Circa username is, so you can look down the board and have a chuckle.
All right. Well, best of luck in the contest. Best of luck in the 2022 campaign, and appreciate this very insightful discussion. And be sure to check out Cleve TA at Cleve TA on Twitter for outstanding NFL content. Definitely among the 10 accounts that I would follow if I was only allowed 10, I would say. So appreciate all your hard work.
No, I appreciate it, guys. It was really fun.
Yeah, of course. Andy, this was a great success. Great idea by you. Great idea.
As much as I shit on the city of Cleveland, it sucks that there's a real nice guy from there. I don't think I've ever said anything nice about Cleveland on the podcast.